of a program like Essential Air Services to a remote and a rural state like Alaska. It truly is essential. And when this amendment comes before the body, I would urge defeat of the McCain amendment. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The Senator from West Virginia.
I'm only going to comment for a minute. But what the Senator from Alaska has said obviously is completely true. And it also points out in this overall philosophical question of what are we doing with this bill? Are we going to pass it or are we going to spend all our time fighting over slots? I'm for passing the bill and leaving slots for conference or whatever unless we can work something out. Nobody wants to agree. Everybody thinks they've got the leverage. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But in the meantime, a bill that has been languishing for all these months and which, in fact, solves one of the problems of Alaska in its entirety. Because the next-gen system, which I've been talking about, which I'm going to talk about more, but not today, it's a global satellite network. It will provide the safety and capacity that's needed for really safe flight in tricky weather, where weather changes very quickly. And, in fact, it is now in place in Alaska. So that doesn't in any way take away from the Essential Air Service problems, which the Senator from Alaska was talking about. I totally agree with her on that. But it just shows that if we hold this bill up and make ourselves slaves to working out slots agreements, which probably can't be worked out on this floor, maybe they can, I hope so, but I doubt it, that we are depriving her of being able, and other states from being able to get, since hers is just a test state, which has this system in place, because of the change of weather, because of the unpredictability of virtually everything when you're flying. It's in effect there, and in 4 other states. And we're trying to get it to all states, which will change the whole future of aviation. With that, I yield the floor.
Senator from Utah.
Mr. President, today the President released his budget for fiscal year 2012. If this was an idea of a Valentine's gift to America and to the American people, he has an odd way of showing his affection. It is the equivalent of taking your fiancée to dinner, asking her to marry you, and then leaving her to take care of the check your maxed-out credit cards and underwater mortgage and the bill for the ring. This budget is quite simply an abdication of adult responsibility, and it is a particular abdication of the responsibility of the President of the United States, who takes an oath to preserve, protect, and defend our Constitution. Our economy is dealing with the hangover of the 2008 economic collapse, the greatest fiscal crisis that I've seen and that we've seen in several generations. Our recovery has been sluggish, and it is not being helped by this administration's regulatory overload and Obamacare, which is set to kill 800,000 jobs. Yet we can already see a still larger crisis approaching. This is nothing short of an existential challenge. Continued deficits and accumulated debt are a genuine threat to individual liberty, continued prosperity, and national security. Absent immediate action, and let me stress that this needs to be immediate action, we face a future where our union is not more perfect, and where government will stand in the way of enterprising businesses and citizens whose only wish is the opportunity to thrive. Yet the President's response to this impending disaster is to vote present. His response was to pass the buck. With due respect, the budget released today is a sorry joke. I would hate to be the White House staffers forced to spin this budget as a step in the right direction. The United States is demanding a Churchill on the issue of deficits and debt, but the administration has delivered us a Chamberlain. Let me break this down. The administration is going to reduce the deficit by $1.1 trillion over 10 years. That sounds like a mighty big number, and I'm sure that the White House has some consultants who have told them that the American people can be duped into thinking that this represents meaningful deficit reduction or change. Let me be clear. This is not meaningful deficit reduction. The administration wants to reduce the deficit by $1.1 trillion over 10 years, total over 10 years. And what does the administration project the deficit to be for this fiscal year? $1.65 trillion. At 10.9% of the gross domestic product, this is the largest deficit as a share of the economy since World War II. Unbelievable. But it is consistent with the way Democrats have behaved since taking over Washington. In 2010, the deficit was $1.3 trillion, and in 2009, $1.4 trillion. So let's put this in perspective. The administration is out there touting its fiscal responsibility, yet its 10-year total deficit reduction is smaller than this year's deficit. The President's much-touted 5-year freeze on discretionary spending, which will save $400 billion, is smaller than the Congressional Budget Office's recent upward revision of the 2011 deficit. Spending this budget as the fiscally responsible thing to do betrays a profound lack of respect for the intelligence of American citizens. This budget contains $53 billion for construction of high-speed rail in Florida, California, and several other states. If there is a bigger government boondoggle out there, I am not aware of it. But the Vice President, in promoting this spending spree, tells Americans that they need to get a grip. With due respect, the American people's grip on the situation is just fine. They understand something that apparently has eluded the best and brightest over on Pennsylvania Avenue. We are out of money. The well that has been financing the New Deal and the New Frontier and the Great Society and the stimulus and Obamacare has finally run dry. It is past time that we stop playing politics with the deficit and debt and make the tough choices that are necessary to put America's finances back on solid ground. Yet there's no effort in this budget to take care of our long-term fiscal problems. None. None at all. Not even the Washington Post is able to spin this one. This is a $3.7 trillion budget. And what is the future of our deficit and debt? This is what the Post had to say. After next year, the deficit will begin to fall, quote, settling around $600 billion a year through 2018, when it would once again begin to climb as a growing number of retirees tapped into Social Security and Medicare, unquote. The new normal under this budget is one of permanent budget deficits long after President Obama has returned to private life. He will be out working on his presidential library while Americans are left holding the bag for his big spending policies. He may not want to admit it, but the most fitting volume for his presidential library might be The Road to Serfdom. How exactly does the administration propose to pay for Social Security and Medicare and national defense under this budget? The bottom line, it doesn't. This budget amounts to gross negligence. Even the progressive blogger Ezra Klein concludes that when reading this budget, it's almost like the Fiscal Commission never happened. Remember that? The President's Fiscal Commission? It issued a report recommending over $4 trillion in cuts, including adjustments to entitlements. It offered controversial, but apparently appropriately bold, proposals to get our nation back on the right track. The President and his team looked at those proposals and bravely decided to leave these problems to the next administration and future generations. Clearly, I am not a fan, but there is one useful item to consider in this budget. It is what progressives might call a teachable moment. To achieve these paltry deficit reduction numbers, the administration had to resort to massive tax increases. As the Post concludes, the tax hikes in this bill will be around $1.6 trillion over 10 years. And here's the point that people need to be reminded of. Even with $2 trillion and possibly more in job-killing tax increases in this budget, it still comes nowhere close to reining in our deficits and debt. For years, we've heard Democrats say that if rich people and businesses paid their fair share in taxes, we could balance the budget and reduce the debt. Well, they sure tested it out on this budget. They soaked the so-called rich and American businesses with a fire hose, and yet we are still facing trillions in debt and hundreds of billions of dollars in deficits. After the much-maligned Bush tax cuts expire and undermine small business job creation, according to the President's own numbers, we will still have to borrow an additional $7.2 trillion through 2021 to pay the bills. the bills that are becoming due from the Obama administration spending policies. This budget should be a turning point in our debate about deficit and debt reduction. Tax increases simply cannot get us there. Unfortunately, the message that tax increases lead to deficit reduction is the Democrats' good word. Over the past decade, I have participated in many discussions about spending and tax policy. As my colleague from Iowa, Senator Grassley, has noted, Democrats basically have two talking points. First, all of the good fiscal history of the 1990s was delivered from the partisan tax increase bill of 1993. And second, all of the bad fiscal history taking place within the past 10 years is owing to the bipartisan tax relief plans originally enacted during the last administration and continued under the present administration. The Democrats' platform does not, it does have the virtue of simplicity. Higher taxes, good. Lower taxes, bad. This record needs to be corrected. Regular viewers of C-SPAN 2 have probably heard others on my side do so before, but it bears repeating, particularly in light of today's budget, that higher taxes will not right our fiscal ship. The myth that higher taxes lead to lower deficits is a persistent one. This is the mainstream account of the Clinton tax hikes. According to this theory, the positive fiscal history of the 1990s resulted from the 1993 tax increases. It is a simple enough argument. According to the other side, by raising taxes and taking more money out of the economy, the government successfully reduced the deficit. Yet, as you can see from this chart, the Clinton administration's own Office of Management and Budget concluded that the 1993 tax increase in the green accounted for only 13% of deficit reduction between 1990 and 2000. Just look at this chart. Well, as a percentage of deficit reduction, the 1993 tax increase ranks behind other factors such as defense costs, cuts, and interest saving. Defense cuts, 35% in the brown, interest saving in the purple. The message here is simple. Tax increases did not drive deficit reduction. It may seem counterintuitive, but raising taxes does not necessarily mean that revenues collected by the government as a percentage of GDP will increase. Consider this chart, which compares changes in federal revenues as a percentage of GDP. And this is for two key four-year periods. Each of these four-year periods was preceded by a major tax policy change. Now let's look at this chart. The first four-year period occurred after the 1993 tax increase was enacted. That's the blue line. That's the first four-year period. The second four-year period occurred after the Jobs and Growth Tax Relief Reconciliation Act of 2003 was enacted. The Jobs and Growth Reconciliation Act was the second of the major tax increase bills enacted during the last administration. It featured reductions on tax rates of capital gains and dividends. Now let's take a look at the first of those four-year periods in each case. 1 year after the 1993 tax hike, we do see increased revenues in that blue line. 1 year. Okay? 1 year after the 2003 tax cut, revenues dropped on the red line from 1993 to 1994. Now take a look at the second through fourth years following the adoption of each bill. You'll see the trend of the first year reverses itself in the second year after the tax hike. The blue line starts down. In the second year, the red line sharply shoots up. As the policies in both bills had time to take effect, the revenue patterns are clear. The positive change in revenue was generally greater after the tax cut bill than it was after the tax increase bill. There is no doubt that our deficits are a serious issue. They threaten the future of our nation. It is irresponsible, however, to say that our dire fiscal situation is the result of government not extracting enough money from the people who actually earn it. The President's budget, with its massive new tax increases and permanent deficits, demonstrates again that our problem is spending. Just look at it. Just look at it. Spending has not grown arithmetically. Spending has not grown geometrically. Spending has grown exponentially. Over the past few years, while Democrats exercise complete control over Washington, non-defense discretionary spending has grown by 24%. And as I've said before, that figure does not even include the bloated stimulus bill enacted in early 2009. Yet these deficits continue to grow in spite of increased revenues. On January 26, CBO published its budget and economic outlook for fiscal years 2011 through 2021. Going on to quote from that report, by CBO's estimates, federal revenues in 2011 will be $123 billion, or 6% more than total revenues recorded 2 years ago in 2009. This increase in federal revenues for 2011 includes a net effect from the one-year across-the-board reduction in payroll taxes. The important fact here is that revenues have increased over the past 2 years, and the deficit has still increased. Our deficit and debt problems are not being driven by tax relief. And despite this evidence, many of my friends on the other side still see raising taxes as the best and only solution. They want to fund out-of-control spending by taking even more money from the people who actually earn it. Proponents of this approach know that the confiscation of what has been lawfully earned can be a hard sell. That's the reason they resort to clever rhetoric, telling us that paying taxes is inherently patriotic. Or we hear talking points about some people not paying their fair share. These sound bites might sound good to the base, but they are not grounded in reality. CBO has published a booklet entitled The Long-Term Budget Outlook. In its most recent version, CBO confirmed that federal revenues have fluctuated between 15% and 21% of GDP over the past 40 years, averaging about 18%. Because of the recession, revenues dipped to around 15% recently. But that should not deceive us into thinking taxes are abnormally low. Using current law assumptions, CBO projected revenues to reach 23% of GDP by 2035. Arguably, those current law assumptions are unrealistic, since they assumed the bipartisan tax relief enacted in 2001 and 2003 would expire, along with relief from the alternative minimum tax at the end of next year. Yet CBO evaluated an alternative, more realistic fiscal scenario. In that scenario, CBO assumed that most of the tax relief enacted in 2001 and 2003 would be extended through 2020. It still assumed that tax relief would expire for so-called high-income taxpayers. But CBO did anticipate that AMT relief would continue, along with other deviations from current law. AMT meaning the alternative minimum tax. Even using this alternative fiscal scenario, CBO found that revenues as a percentage of GDP would increase to just over 19% in 2020 and stay at that level for several years. That is to say, in this scenario, the level of taxation would still be above the 40-year historical average of 18% of GDP. Now, I want to briefly return to the January CBO analysis that I referred to earlier. That analysis, which assumes that most of the components of the tax package enacted at the end of 2010 will continue to be extended, along with the modified estate and gift provisions also in that same legislation, calculates that annual government revenues will steadily increase going forward, but still average about 18% of GDP through 2021. I spent the past few minutes discussing the CBO projections of various policy scenarios. I'm sure this presentation is made for some very gripping television, but the point I'm trying to convey is a critical one. The fiscal reality is that taxes are not abnormally low. Continuing current tax policy yields federal revenues at about the historic average of GDP for the past 40 years. Increasing taxes on anyone, even so-called high earners, will push government revenues above the 40 years historical average as a percentage of GDP. I know there are many who would still support raising taxes above this historical level. The President has made it very clear today that he certainly does. But it is important to heed the words of the CBO before we raise taxes. In its long-term budget outlook, CBO had this to say about a scenario where the bipartisan tax relief of 2001 and 2003 expired, along with AMT relief. According to CBO, quote, marginal tax rates on income from labor and capital would rise considerably under the extended baseline scenario. The increase in the marginal tax rate on labor would reduce people's incentive to work, and the increase in the marginal tax rate on capital would reduce their incentive to save, unquote. Now, the basic point that I'm making is that tax hikes aren't like finding a pot of gold at the end of a rainbow. That money has to come from somewhere, and there will be consequences to redistributing it. Moreover, as we saw in the budget released today, even spiking taxes by over $2 trillion will not help us to balance our books. Abnormally high spending drove the deficits of the past. It is like driving the deficits of today. It is driving the deficits of today. And it will drive the deficits of the future. Some folks, in response to the question of whether the President is triangulating after the drubbing Democrats took in November, have answered no. He's just being himself. You can say that again. He supported big government as a community organizer. He supported it as a senator on this floor and in the committees. He supported it as a presidential candidate. He supports it today. But the stakes are higher now. He is the nation's chief executive. And ultimately, the President is responsible for guiding our nation through the treacherous waters of an impending fiscal crisis. These are not easy shoals to navigate. Yet, the statesman really cannot shirk his or her duty. As Senator Henry Clay once put it, I would rather be right than be president. Some things are bigger than the next election, and getting our deficits under control is one of those things. The American people know that President Obama's budget is not right. The President administration is spending almost 25% of our GDP. Historically high, except during and shortly after World War II. The last time we had that kind of expenditure was in 1950. Yeah. That's why I'm so strongly for a balanced budget constitutional amendment. I wish we didn't have to go to that, but I don't see any other way that we'll get spending under control. Because I think Congress has been institutionally incapable of bringing down spending. And one reason is that with the help of the mainstream media, people out there actually believe that, or members of Congress actually believe that they'll be kept in office by spending. And up to now, that's been pretty true. But the American people are starting to wake up. They're starting to realize that, as sincere as some of my colleagues are on the other side, their economic philosophy is corrupt. Maybe corrupt's too strong a word, but it's wrong. Definitely wrong. Well, we know that the American people are not going to stop demanding real leadership on this issue. And I feel badly because I personally like the President, no question about it. I showed him great friendship when he was here. I've shown him friendship since he was elected. And we all know that in order to resolve these problems, we have to get entitlements under control. And as good as some of us are here in the Congress, we can't do it without presidential leadership. We just can't. I have a suggestion for the President. He would get down in history as one of the truly great presidents if he would work with us and work together, bringing bipartisan people together and work to resolve these conflicts. You can't do it with just 15% of the budget. And you can't do it with just tax increases. You can't do it with an ever-expanding federal government. You can't do it with an ever-expanding set of federal employees. You can't do it with ever-expanding regulations, although some of them are important. All of these things may be important, but you can't do it with those concepts. The only way you can do it is to get in and take the whole budget and work with both sides and see what we can do to bring people together and see if we have the courage to be able to resolve these problems, not only for today, but for our kids and grandkids, and in Elaine, in my case, great-grandkids as well, hereafter. I don't want the President to fail, but I have to point these things out. Let's face it, he's getting some very poor advice. And even when he wants to come to the center, he gets wrapped really hard on the knuckles by the far left in his party, most of whom are far left, at least those here on the floor. Very few moderates on the Democrat side. I have found that those who are moderate generally are people who are moderate when their vote doesn't count. And I think if you go back and look at the record, you'll find that to be true. But the vast majority of my friends on the other side really believe that we should keep spending and we should keep taxing, and that will keep them in power. But all the power in the world doesn't count if we're reckoning the greatest country in the world. I think our side has to wake up a little bit, too. We can't just do it with tax cuts, either. On the other hand, I'd much rather have tax cuts that spur on the economy and create small business jobs than to continue to spend us into oblivion. Nevertheless, we're all going to have to work together if we're ever going to get this problem solved. The only way I know to solve it is through presidential leadership combined with courage on the part of members of Congress. But the way they're solving it on this budget is pathetic. There are so many budgetary gimmicks in this bill that it's just plain pathetic. And I'll repeat what I said earlier, and that is the little over $1 trillion, $1.1 trillion in deficit reduction that this bill says it will do over 10 years. What is that, a little over $100 billion a year? That isn't even as much as our deficit for this year alone, 2011. And during those 10 years, there will be hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars of continued deficits until we reach a point in about 2022 where we will be around $22 trillion in debt. Now, Mr. President, I don't know about you or anybody else in this chamber, but I think it's time for us to start standing up. I think it's time for the President to lead. I think the Democrats who have control of the bureaucracy ought to start working with us on let's get that bureaucracy trimmed down. And let's really consider the one aspect of constitutional politics that really has worked, and that is allowing 50 states to participate. And through 50 state laboratories, we can pick and choose the things that work best. Had we done that with health care, we would not be in the mess that health care is in today and the oblivion that it's headed for. We can't just do it with tax increases. And frankly, my experience has been that tax increases really don't work. What really does work is giving the small business sector incentives, real incentives. Not, quote, investments, unquote, but real incentives to keep creating the 70% of jobs that only the small business sector can do. If we increase those taxes, we're going to be in a mess. And I can just tell you, the budgeteers at OMB and CBO, as sincere and dedicated as they may be, I like Mr. Lieu very much. I think Mr. Elmendorf is a very fine budgeteer and economist, but they are always low in their estimates of deficits. It could be much worse than what we know right now. So, Mr. President, I hope that we will have the guts, I hope the President will have the guts to lead, and I hope that we'd have the guts to follow that lead and hopefully turn this ship of state around. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
Senator from Alaska.
thank you very much. And, Mr. President, I want to talk on essential air service, but I do want to make a couple comments after hearing my colleague from the other side talk about the budget. I want to assure him there are some moderates over here that understand the value and the managing of the budget, and someone comes from Alaska. You know, we support gun rights, oil and gas drilling. We support a lot of things that maybe the senator may not be aware of as a Democrat. But the other thing is, you know, leadership's about all of us working together. I look for the president's budget, but that doesn't mean we're just going to sit here and wait for him to make all the decisions. We have a responsibility here, Mr. President. And I know last year I sat here and voted for the Session-McCaskill amendment that would have reduced some of the spending, controlled some of the spending that we couldn't get all the votes on the other side to make happen. I supported every dime that came back from the TARP repayment to go to pay off the deficit, which now we're close to 80% or better of that money coming back, maybe as much as 90%. I supported the Gregg and Wyden legislation, a bipartisan effort to deal with tax reform to get corporate rates from the highest or second highest in the world down to about midstream, lowering the 6 individual rates down to 3 rates, making it simplified so people can fill out their taxes on one form, and getting rid of a bunch of loopholes. So it is a combination of all of us that will create leadership. It's not one person. It's not one president. It's Republicans and Democrats and independents sitting on this floor making tough decisions, not a bunch of political speeches. So let me end there and just get to the topic I wanted to talk about. At some point I'll come down here and talk more on the budget as it's rolled out, and I know on the Budget Committee we'll have plenty of presentation on that. Mr. President, I came down here to talk about essential air services. I want to thank Chairman Rockefeller and Senator Hutchinson for their leadership on this very important bill. They've worked tirelessly to pass this bill in the 111th Congress. They are again putting in long hours on it this year. The bill before the Senate is an incredibly important piece of legislation. The FAA bill is about creating jobs. It puts Americans to work rebuilding our nation's deteriorating airport infrastructure. It modernizes our air traffic control system to reduce congestion in the skies. And it makes our nation's airspace safer and more efficient. There are so many important reasons why we should succeed in passing this legislation, which passed the Senate 93-0 last year. Even in a year that was marked with contentious and partisan battles, this FAA bill was truly a bipartisan piece of legislation. And that can largely be credited to the hard work of Chairman Rockefeller and Senator Hutchinson and their staffs. This bill has been delayed far too long. We are currently on the 17th short-term extension since the last comprehensive FAA bill expired in 2007. We owe it to the American people to help reduce airport delays, put Americans back to work, and provide the 21st century airspace our nation needs to facilitate commerce and compete in a world economy. This bill is especially important for states like mine. Aviation is the lifeblood of Alaska. It's truly our highway in the sky. We have 6 times more pilots and 16 times more planes per capita than the rest of the country. In Alaska, small planes are the equivalent of a minivans in the lower 48. They are how Alaskans get around. I'd like to talk briefly about Essential Air Service Program, which is vital to my constituents. My friend from Arizona has introduced an amendment which would repeal the Essential Air Service Program. And I truly have grave concerns for what this would mean, not only for my rural Alaskans, but for rural Americans as a whole. The Essential Air Service Program originated at the same time as airline deregulation in 1978. When airline deregulation passed, it gave airlines almost total freedom to determine which markets to serve domestically and what fares to charge for that service. This is not a bad thing. Some good things came out of airline deregulation. It fostered competition among airlines. It brought down ticket prices for many air routes between large urban centers. But when Congress passed airline deregulation, it also recognized that something needed to be done to protect rural communities. They weren't the most profitable routes for air carriers, so the idea was to maintain a minimum level of service. That is where the Essential Air Service Program came from. The program provided modest subsidies to air carriers to provide service to communities that would have otherwise lost all air service through deregulation. Since 1978, the Essential Air Service Program has successfully guaranteed small communities that were served by certified air carriers before deregulation, it would maintain a minimum level of scheduled air service. The program has been a vital link for rural America. There are very real consequences to eliminating this program for my constituents, especially in the 44 communities served by the EAS program. Let me show you this poster. This poster shows Alaska's limited road infrastructure. 82% of Alaska communities are not on the road system and rely on aviation as a primary means of transportation. For goods, people, mail, it all has to come by aircraft. And let me not confuse those that are watching. We did not oversize the state of Alaska. Alaska doesn't sit down here by California or in a little box somewhere. This is actually the size of Alaska in comparison to the lower 48. The red lines show the road network. Now, you can imagine the road network that would be shown in the lower 48, but this is all the road network we have. So for the rest of the state, it is by air or boat. People in communities face some of the highest costs of living in the country. Rural Alaskans can't drive to a Safeway when they need something. There are no roads and there are no Safeways. If you eliminate the EAS program, it is going to drive these prices even higher in rural Alaska. Gary Williams from the village of Cake sent me a letter about what the McCain Amendment would mean for his community. By the way, the EAS ensures Cake receives at least 3 weekly flights from a small Cessna 208 aircraft during the winter. Again, this is not a jetliner. Now, maybe in Alaska we think a Cessna 208 is a jetliner, but that's a very small plane. Gary Williams in Cake says, I frankly can't imagine being without service. It would isolate and cripple us on many levels. In addition to eliminating the only source of transportation for many communities, Senator McCain's amendment would actually put people out of work. It would hurt small businesses in Alaska and across this country. It's truly a job-killing amendment. Mr. President, I'd like to read from a letter my office received from the owner of Pen Air. Pen Air is a family-owned business, started in 1955 by a young 19-year-old teenager named Orrin Siebert. When Orrin started his business in 1955, he had a 2-seat Taylorcraft and a 4-seat Piper Tri-Pacer. Orrin is a great example of the pioneering spirit that embodies Alaska. Over the years, Orrin grew the business into a successful regional air carrier, serving communities throughout rural Alaska. Pen Air is now run by Orrin's son, Danny. This is a letter from Danny Siebert, the president of Pen Air. Quote, for many of these communities, Pen Air is the only scheduled passenger air service link to the rest of the world. He goes on to say if the McCain Amendment is passed, quote, would have devastating effect on many remote communities in Alaska, on many air carriers who provide those communities with the air transportation services, and on Alaska's economy. Here's an email my office received from the Copper Valley Air Service. Copper Valley flies 2 EAS routes serving the communities of McCarthy and May Creek. The emails read, if this amendment is approved, it will put Copper Valley Air Service out of business. It will cost 8 jobs. This cannot pass. This is an email from Bruce Phillips, the chief pilot of Wings of Alaska. Repealing EAS would, quote, not only diminish jobs and raise costs, but also potentially abolish air service to some communities entirely. Villages in southeast Alaska have no roads and limited, if any, ferry service, making air service a lifeline. This is how they receive everything from medication to mail, to groceries, as well as how they travel for medical, personal, and business. I've got a stack of these letters that my office has received in the past few days from communities that would lose air service if the McCain Amendment is adopted, from individuals in the communities who are terrified about what this would mean for the price of goods in their community, from those worried about the cost of air travel if they get sick and they need to seek medical attention at a hospital, and from small air carriers worried that they will either have to lay off employees or go under altogether. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that all these letters would be entered into the record.
Without objection.
It's easy to call this wasteful if you don't understand the needs of rural communities. They don't have any other means of transportation. When he introduced the amendments, my friend from Arizona suggested that folks are bypassing essential air service flights to drive to a hub and hub airports where they can get cheaper fares to more destinations. Consider how that applies in my state. For the community of Adak and the Aleutian Islands, and the connection to the nearest medium hub is Anchorage. I laugh a little bit because I want to put this truly in perspective. It's almost 1,200 miles. So if you want to, as Senator McCain says, drive to the hub, you can't do that because you're here. In order to get to here, you have to go by air or catch a boat, assuming the weather is good. So his analysis that the people are just driving off to these hubs and catching flights that are cheaper is inaccurate. And he's unfamiliar, obviously, with what's going on in Alaska. To put the number in perspective, it's about the same distance from Los Angeles to Houston, except unlike Los Angeles and Houston, there are no roads between these two places. I agree with Senator McCain that we need to do something to address our nation's budget deficit. Before I started this conversation, I made some comments of the things that I've done, and I will continue to work in that vein. But I don't believe you should balance the federal budget on the backs of communities and people facing some of the highest costs of living and the toughest conditions in this country. And that is exactly what the McCain Amendment would do. When Senator McCain introduced this amendment, he cited a July 2009 GAO report in suggesting that the EAS has outlived its usefulness. Well, I've got that very same report, and, you know, it's always, sometimes people, when they come to make speeches, they do selective, so I'm just going to go to page 2 on this report. This is from the GAO. This is what they said. Our review focused on communities within the continental United States, we like to refer to the lower 48, that have received EAS subsidized service. We focused our review on these communities because the requirements for communities in Alaska are different than the communities in other states, and airports outside the contiguous states are not representative of the programs in the rest of the country. I can't speak for Senator McCain's constituents in the 4 communities in Arizona that receive essential air service. Maybe the folks of Kingman and Page and Prescott and Show Low, Arizona, that receive EAS don't think it's necessary. I'm not sure if Senator McCain has checked with them, but maybe that's how they feel. But I can speak for the rural Alaskans who have contacted my office who are terrified about this amendment and what it would mean for their community, for their way of life, for their very health and well-being of their families. We are in the midst of a recovery from an economic collapse. Mr. President, it makes no sense to eliminate a valuable program that helps rural America and put small business to work. This amendment would take us in the wrong direction. I strongly urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back my remaining time and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. The Senate is in session today. Senators have been dealing with a bill to reauthorize the Federal Aviation Administration, as well as responding to the President's 2012 budget, which was also released earlier today. At 4:30 Eastern, the Senate is going to take up 2 judicial nominations, and votes on those nominations are expected to be held at about 5:30 p.m. Eastern. And we'll continue our live coverage of the U.S. Senate here on C-SPAN, too. Just an update on that budget from the President. The proposal had a couple of items, including dealing with the Defense Department, providing no real growth in defense spending. It would also reduce spending in Iraq, made possible in part by the reduction of U.S. forces there. The President's budget calls for a 5-year freeze on non-mandatory spending, and it would cut the deficit in half by the end of the President's first term. You can see an earlier Department of Defense briefing and other briefings from the administration online at the C-SPAN video library. You're watching live coverage from the Senate floor here on C-SPAN 2. While senators are in a quorum call, just to let you know the federal budget for the next year has been a big talking point today. President Obama released a $3.7 trillion proposal for fiscal year 2012. But in the House tomorrow, members will be taking up a bill to fund the current budget year. And that bill would fund the government from March 4th through September. It proposes large cuts according to promises that Republicans made in their pledge to America. Conservatives say they cut about $100 billion from the fiscal year 2011 budget as promised, and that money is coming out of the president's budget that was proposed last year. We could see a final vote on fiscal year 2011 funding in the House later this week. And you can always watch live coverage of the House on our companion network, C-SPAN.
Senator from Illinois.
Mr. President, I ask consent that Corbett call be suspended
Without objection.
and consent to speak as if in morning business.